Hi, this is Susan at the Beverly Library again. Literally, I am at the Beverly Library. This is where we're going to start our fourth walk of Beverly. Now, the Beverly Library has served the people of Beverly since the 1930s. It started as a little library in one of the schools. It was then moved to the second floor of the firehouse in 37. In the early 40s, it became the first branch of the Washington County Library System, the main library being in Marietta. In 1954, the library moved again to 2 rooms in Mrs. Alfreda Firestone's house. This house was at the corner of Center and 4th. And then in May of 67, we moved to our current location. In the early 200s, we closed down for remodeling and moved back again to the firehouse and was rededicated in 2002. Hold on one second. Okay, now I'm back behind the library and had to move. My patrons must be helped. Okay, so if you noticed the unicorn out front, this year's the summer reading program for the Beverly Library is Imagine Your Story. So it's all about myths and legends and the stories that everybody should know, and a lot of people don't. So we had to move everything online, and it's been a learning experience. So now back here behind the library, well, actually to the south of the library, you can see the basketball court and the tennis courts. Where I'm currently sitting is the location of the second Beverly High School. And it opened its doors in 1892, and that would be at the corner of 5th and McIntosh. Also at this location, if we pan around this way, see the monument that the Lions have erected for our veterans of foreign wars. Let me see. It's way up there. Okay, so I moved again. To give a little more information about the old Beverly High School, when it was originally built, it was a multi-floored brick building, and then in the 20s, they built on a gym and home ec and science labs. And before it closed in the 50s, it sounds like it wasn't just a high school, but it also had some of the grade school too. And it was starting to get a little crowded. So it was decided that they needed more space. And that is when Fort Frye was built. Fort Frye was built in 1955. And it has been the high school in Beverly ever since. It has had much success in sports. Here recently, the Lady Cadets basketball team was very successful. They've had success in baseball, softball, volleyball, golf. Their cheerleading squads are excellent. They've had many track and cross-country stars. But it's not all about the sports. Their academics teams have also been very successful. Their FFA judging squads have been very successful. They've had many successful graduates. And that is Fort Frye High School. Okay, I jumped again. I'm over here at the side entrance of Beverly Elementary. And Beverly Elementary opened its doors in 1970. The Fort Frye School District has 3 elementaries. There's Beverly, Lowell, and Salem Liberty. And bonus points for anybody who knows what Salem Liberty's original name was. It's kind of cute. And over here we have the Beverly Pool. And then as we come back around here, back that way is the track, the football field, the baseball and softball fields. But then we have this open space over here, and that is, or was, the original site of Fort Frye. And Fort Frye was named for Joseph Frye. If you're wondering who he was actually the drummer boy at the Battle of Bunker Hill. He was a Harvard grad who moved to Waterford. Lieutenant Frye served the community as a teacher, justice of the peace, civic leader, and juror. And he married a Sally Baker, and they had 3 children. That really doesn't tell you why we named our fort for him. Well, he originally designed Fort Frye and tried to convince people that they needed a stronghold. But originally his idea was rejected until January 2nd of 1791. Big Bottom was attacked. Now, originally, from what people have been told, the original destination for that attack was the town of Beverly. But the Indians got distracted at Big Bottom, and some of the people managed to escape and make their way to Beverly and warned everybody. The next day, they got together and decided that, yeah, they probably did need a stronghold. So they went and got Frye's plans, and they started building. Now, they had different groups that were assigned different tasks. There was a group that would go and chop the trees. There was a group that used their oxen to bring the trees in. There was a group that would process the trees. There was another group that started building. And the end of February, a friendly native stopped in to tell them that there was an attack coming. And then on March 10th, the main gate was put in place. And the very next day, there was an attack. But they had built the fort so well and defended it so well that the attack was rebuffed. And it wasn't later that it was named Fort Frye after its original designer. Now, what did Fort Frye look like? Alrighty. This is from a book called Fort Frye on the Muskingum by Elizabeth Owen. So, they erected 3 two-story block houses so that they would form the corner buildings of an irregular triangle with its base extending 200 feet along the riverbank and not many yards from the edge of the bank. Their main object seemed to have quick access to the river in case their situation at any time should become desperate, but how they managed to remain in the fort during seasons of high water has never been explained. The upper stories of the 3 corner houses extended about 2 feet beyond the walls of the lower stories in order that the loopholes might be used in warding off attacks. Log houses for the various families were so located that their outer walls formed part of the enclosed walls of the fort. Less than an acre of ground was covered by the buildings and the yard, and sharpened rails were driven into the ground to form a high fence between the outer walls of the building. Rails were driven in a second row that prevented shots from the outside entering the fort enclosure through the interstices of the main rails. A blacksmith shop was erected in the center of the enclosure, and a well was dug so that there would be no lack of water for drinking purposes or for quenching fire in case the enemy should throw burning brands upon the houses, as they sometimes did in making a determined attack upon the settlers. Now, inside the fort, there was 40 men and several women and children, and the captain was William Gray. And just a side note, Joseph Frye never lived in Fort Frye. He remained in Waterford, and I will tell that story next week. And some people needed convincing to join the fort. A Jabez Barlow actually lived in a hollowed out sycamore, and when he was told that he needed to come to Fort Frye, he told him no. He had never bothered the natives, and they had never bothered him, so he didn't see the point in it. Until one day he came home and there was a bunch of natives waiting for him. He decided, nah, it was time to move into Fort Frye. Okay, so what was life like in the fort? Well, actually, the people that lived in the fort were still obligated to keep their homestead going. So they would have to go home every day to tend their fields, mind their animals, and that kind of stuff. So they had to have a scout go with them to guard them as they went about their work. And this went on for some time, actually. And then they started getting a little lax. But then in September of 1793, word got back that the Indians, or the natives, were never going to sign a peace treaty. And so they decided that they might need to strengthen the fort. So at that time, a second row of palisades, driven 3 feet into the ground, and standing 12 feet above the surface of the soil, was now established 30 feet outside the fort, making a tight enclosure beyond the walls and down to the river. There were 40 dogs belonging to the families of the fort, and at nightfall they were turned into the enclosure between the palisades and the walls of the houses, which had been connected with sharpened rails. The family tree of some of these dogs had wolves perched on their boughs, and their tender voices must have been anything but a welcome sound to natives bent upon surprising the inhabitants of the fort. And among the ancient and particular firearm in the possession of the daddies and use of the fort, there were 3 long-barreled duck guns that could shoot quite some distance, as one obscene old savage could testify, who had thought himself at a safe distance, that he thought to taunt his white foes. It is said that some of the old Connecticut guns had barrels 7 feet in length, and we're still trying to figure out how you would shoot a 7-foot barreled gun, but maybe that's why the fort was built the way it was. Okay, so they stayed in the fort until the spring of 1795, at which time it was deemed safe and they all moved back into their homesteads, and at which time the fort was recycled. They took the lumber and used it to build other things. And one of the floods, they did find where the well was. And I think I've talked long enough for today, and that will conclude walk 4. And that also concludes the last walk of Beverly. Next week we will head to Waterford. See you then.